All right, good evening, junior parents. We are thrilled that you are here with us for our second junior parent night. We are really happy to see everybody. Wish you all a very, very happy new year. We're thrilled to be spending time with you tonight. We are actively working with your students, and we are really starting to get to know your students intimately during our one-on-one meetings. So it's really nice to spend some time with each of you and to let you know where we are in our process and the work that we're doing with your students. We are recording this event. So in terms of taking copious notes, know that we will send out an email later this week with the recording so you can listen to our comments back and our special guests' comments at a later date. Before we get too deep into our program, I want to acknowledge Bo Lindsay, the division head for 11th and 12th grade.
Hello, thank you, Ross. It's great to see all the junior parents. I've been loving working with your students this year. Wish we could be working on campus, but so impressed with their resiliency and tenacity and everything they're bringing to their classes and their programs. And I look forward to listening and learning with you tonight.
Thank you, Bo, for your continued partnership and everything you bring to our team and everything you do on behalf of our students. We could not do our jobs without you. A couple other logistical points to make. Our slides that we will show a bit later on this evening will all be posted on My Milken later on this week. We're going to follow up home with an email I already mentioned. So please beware of that. In terms of questions as the night unfolds, if you have specific questions about anything you hear, a couple recommendations. One, you can use the chat and send any questions you have directly to Samantha Schreiber, one of our college counselors who you're going to hear from later on tonight. She is the only person who's going to be looking at their chat during the evening, the only person potentially replying to chats during the evening. We will assess the questions later on tonight and see if we have time for Q&A when the event is over. The other thing I'll point out is that you receive an email from your student's college counselor every week. So if there are ever questions that you have, please respond to those emails and let us know how we can support you. We're going to talk later on. I think I'm talking later on about formal interactions we will have, but know that we are always available over email. But in trying to not keep you all with us all evening, we're going to try to get through our program as efficiently as we can. It's my honor to introduce to you our first special guest, Ed Devine. Ed is going to help us take a deep dive into the landscape of college admission, but I want to give Ed a little bit of a background first so you know who he is and who's joining us. Ed's been working in admissions for 29 years. He has represented 6 different institutions during that time. Most recently, Ed worked with students and families from California as the Lafayette College West Coast Regional Director of Admission. He's also worked in California as a Regional Director of Admission for Loyola University in Chicago and Hawaii Pacific. Ed started in admission at the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy in Boston and also worked at Lemoyne College, which is a Jesuit school located in upstate New York. Ed served as the president of WACAC, which is the Western Association of College Admission Counseling, also as the chair of the Regional Admission Counselor of California Group, and as the founding chair of the National Association for Regional Admission Counseling. Ed himself attended Colby College in Maine, where he majored in human development. Ed currently lives in Hawaii, where he is joining us now from, and he lives there with his wife, who is the director of college counseling at a school in Honolulu. And Ed is currently consulting with universities and other organizations in the higher education access space. I am not speaking in hyperbole when I say Ed is a massive rock star in our industry, and we are beyond thrilled that he is with us tonight. And I will turn it over to him to take it from here.
All right, Ross, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Still afternoon here, but I am excited to be here to work with you. Love working with the families from Milken, and happy that you are launching into this journey. And I will say to start, one of my favorite teams. You have it right there at Milken. So working with Ross, Jessica, Shelly, Sam, and Zoya, you've got a great group to work with. There's no other reason I would drive up the 405 every year to visit the school, if it wasn't for that group right there. So welcome to the College Search. You are in good hands. And I'm excited to talk tonight a little bit about College Search and finding that fit. I've loved my time in college admissions, love partnering with the folks on the high school side. As Ross mentioned, my wife is also on the high school side. So many times she does come home and tell me what we're doing wrong on the college side, namely creating stress in your students' lives. But hopefully we can de-stress that a little bit and talk about some of the tried and true strategies. But really, the team that you have to work with there at Milken is amazing, and they are going to guide you. They've been through this. They've put a lot of work and energy and effort into their connection to the profession, to their connections with the universities, and they know some things about what's going to happen. They may not give you, the answers right away that you want, but follow their lead, and through this journey, they will guide you. So I'm excited to work with always the students from your high school, from Milken. I love that your college counseling is even noted under your website, under curriculum. And I think it's an important thing to reflect on, where that college counseling office can be found on the Milken website. It's part of curriculum. And hopefully there is some learning that takes place through this search and through this journey. And I'm just going to launch in and talk about a few talking points here about forming that college list. I will talk about selectivity in college and how that really impacts the student psyche and their kind of process, but really it's nothing to be afraid about. We will reflect on decisions and how they're made, how we do things in committee, how we talk about applicants, what we look at. There's really no mystery there, and there's really no mystery what goes on behind the scenes. Sometimes our decisions don't always make sense to people outside of the university, but we will share, and I will share some information on what takes place in committee and when decisions are made. We will talk about the transition to college, why students choose a school, and what May 1 should represent to our rising seniors. I think oftentimes when we launch into this, students start to think about claiming that college as theirs at May 1 and think about that as some kind of finish line. But really, it's the start to the college process, and all the work that you do now in this search process really should help you to find your way to thinking about what you're going to do for the 4 years in school. As you launch into this process, you're going to first start to get to know who you are. That's the most critical part. That's what your counselors are going to be experts at pulling out of you, helping you to understand your test scores, your academic background, but really thinking beyond that to what you bring to the table, what you'll bring to a college or university through your extracurricular activities, your personal narrative, things that are going to pop out through your activities list, your writing, and just your background. And then importantly, you start to know yourself and then start to look for the colleges and start to define the schools and what you're after. When I talk to a lot of college sophomores or freshmen, they reflect back on their search, and it's demystified by the realization that they really feel like they should have just thought about what they want to do or what they want to do in college. So really, many students talk about a bucket list and forming a bucket list. And over this journey to May 1, really exploring what you want to do, why you've done things in high school, and why you want to continue with those. So looking at what schools offer, not just in our rankings, not just even in our academics, but really what you get to take advantage of as a student as a whole. So our location, our extracurricular activities, opportunity to explore new destinations. I went to school in Maine. It was pretty cold. I worked at a school in Syracuse, New York, cold. I worked at Loyola Chicago, cold. So I think I deserved my time working for 2 universities in Hawaii. But obviously students choosing those locations had a blast with all of them and chose those for different reasons. So think about where you're going and what you're going to experience in and outside of the classroom as you launch into this journey. But that inward look at who you are, what's important to you, things that you like to do, really should drive this. And you're going to find the match from there. I love talking to students from California to help them understand that there are tons of options out there. We know a lot in California about the UC system, the Cal State system, by far the most comprehensive state program anywhere in the country, all the way down to the community colleges. I would argue there's a smaller number of private schools in the state of California. I grew up in New England, where there are probably hundreds of schools. And so as a student in high school, there was really a lot of noise about different colleges trying to attract our attention as students. And so that shift in that understanding that there are options was a little bit different than if you grow up in California, where there's a smaller number of schools. We've seen a huge transition with the number of students that do leave the state of California for higher education. That number has been on the rise, and I think students have left California in bigger numbers, almost to the tune of 44,000 students a year. But they're really doing great work with their counselors and with their search and considering a whole host of opportunities. There are about 3,500 schools in the US, 17,000 worldwide. So there are opportunities. It's not if I can go to college, it's where, and it's the why. There are faith-based institutions. I've worked for 2 of those. Many students leave in Milken may be attracted to that. Others may want to step away from that. We hear a lot about the Ivy League, but I was able to attend a NESCAC school, one of the small New England colleges. It was so instrumental in my development, really the opportunity to be involved, much like you are at Milken. I was able to play 2 sports, get involved in clubs, do study abroad. But really for me, the mentorship within the faculty was something that I liked about that small school. There are 44 schools that fall into that category. Great as far as academics, small as far as athletics and Division III. Lafayette was a Patriot League school, a great host of schools like Lehigh, Bucknell, Holy Cross. I love the colleges that change lives. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about that, but the CTCL group provides a lot of great opportunity to research and check out some schools. So as you start to do the search, there are going to be the schools like the Ivy League schools and the Stanfords that you know about, but really start to look at these other groups to find those schools. And as we look at selectivity, as you talk about admissions, I think selectivity is something that puts a lot of fear in the families and in the students. It will work out. When I ask students in live presentations, the most selective school, what percentage of applications they admit, they all can hone in on that number at 4%. I always jokingly tell them it was -2%. And most believe me, they really believe that you could have a negative accept rate. It's impossible to do that, but they will believe that at some point. Nationally, it's over 70%. So the selectivity that drives things. I'm just going to share some quick numbers here just to give you some ideas on how numbers work and how the funnel works and how we do things internally. So most selective schools they're going to fall under that 10% admit rate. They're getting very high numbers of applications and admitting that small population. Their testing, class rank, GPA, rigor, and activities are all going to be very, very high. One of the things there you see is that admit rate, and that's something that students hone in on as they talk about colleges. But look down at the next number, 79%. That's the matriculation rate. That's the number of admitted students that choose the school. And even at the most selective schools, not every student admitted will attend. But that yield rate is something that we focus in on. And as we look at schools that get into the highly selective category, they may admit a higher percentage, 22, 30%, but their yield rates tend to drop quite a bit. You can see GPA and testing will drop down a little bit, but these are still top students, very competitive admit pools. But I do like to focus on that yield rate because that's the number of students, again, admitted that choose the school. And we, in a lot of the schools, start to look at that. We start to talk about yield. And as we consider the pandemic and we consider that more students are sending more applications, I think, in the early signs right now. But we're going to ask ourselves, when making decisions at these highly selective schools, will the student choose us? Or are they a fit? What's the likelihood that we could enroll them? And so understanding that yield rate, huge drop, right? So 80% down to about 40% of admitted students. And that, as you work through your selectivity bands, really will change quite a bit. But again, you'll find schools admitting 56%, 60%, all the way up to 80% of their pool. And you can look at that enrollment funnel as it plays out. We will admit a lot more than we enroll. And we will, again, at some of these schools that are highly selective, and moderately selective, want to understand that you have done the research, you have convinced us there's a sense of fit. And that's why really students aren't successful if they expand their college list too widely. It's a fear that I'm hearing from some counselors right now because some of the schools went up 60%, 40% in applications in the early decision rounds this year, the highly selective schools. And a lot of students, because it was test optional, thought, let me give it a shot. And sometimes they're not going to be able to really show a school or do the research on a school to let them know that they're in the right place. Your counselors are going to be awesome at coaching you through the 3-tiered list, the reach, the target, the likely. It's a band, the 3 bands that you'll put all your schools into. You'll follow this through to find that college success. The reach schools are the ones that everybody's trying to get into. You're probably going to get some deny letters. That's an okay part of this process. There's no award given to the student who never gets a deny letter. But again, you want to be realistic, and I think the counselors at your school really will help deliver what is realistic, the why you would go for a reach school. There should be a love of that school, a love of that institution, but something else that you bring that might tip the scales in your favor. Those target schools, you fit nicely into their application profile. You love the schools, they're really good fits. The likely schools, you kind of are above the class profile. The great thing there, you know you're going to get some acceptances likely, but you'll also probably have opportunity to get some scholarship. Again, thinking about these schools and these lists help you to offset what we just talked about when it comes to the selectivity. What we consider and what we look at in the committees, again, there are changing times. Really rely on your counselors this year. Many high school counselors and colleges and universities are going through a new growth pattern. We're coming up with a new playbook of sorts because things are different. The movement of test optional has been huge, about 1,700 schools. And I know you're going to get more on testing, so definitely glad that that's part of your presentation tonight. But that's a big shift for a lot of the colleges and universities out there. Even for ones that were already test optional, they probably had opportunity to consider testing as a big part of what they looked at. We also are very aware that your activities resumes are going to be compromised or look different. And I will spend a minute or two talking about that because we're just getting a look at that. And we understand the thing about this pandemic, it's worldwide. So it's not, we've seen things like this before where there's regional catastrophes or issues, but this is worldwide. So we do understand that. But there is time to explore and be creative with activities and really think outside the box. It's tough right now for athletes, people involved in theater. They're missing that critical part of who they are and what they do. But we're finding students that are now creatively coming up with activities. They're creating opportunity online to maybe review plays or watch. A theater group might watch a bunch of plays and then start a discussion group or book clubs. We've seen students doing some amazing things within their family, just kind of learning to cook or learning to discuss family history. They're really finding creative ways to use what they have at their resource, and we won't expect any more than that. So when it comes to the testing and it comes to the resumes, those are the 2 big shifts that we're anticipating. We've seen it right now in our early rounds, our early admission rounds, that there are students who just didn't have access to testing. Others that just couldn't play sports or couldn't be active in their clubs and organizations, but really look to find ways to capture what you do with their time outside of the classroom. The testing will be part of the future. It'll be part of your strategy. You may apply to schools that don't require it or you won't need it. Don't overthink it at this point. It's there. There are ways to do free preparation. There's a game plan, I'm sure, in place for students at Milken. But we will adjust to that. We will need to make those adjustments as we consider and make these decisions. But we will get to know your academic qualities. We do look at personal qualities quite a bit. When we talk about your personal background, that's where some of the decisions that we make might not make sense to the outside world. We have what we call institutional priorities, and we look to create dynamic, textured classes that are full of diversity in all forms. So you might be a student very well qualified to be at our institution, but we are looking for somebody else. We're looking for students that bring some other kind of background. And so those personal qualities define who you are. And if we see that match and fit, you're likely to get the nod. If not, just understand that wasn't the place for you. As you go through and start to look at, why you're going to choose a school, I like to begin this process thinking about May 1 and thinking about why. And I think your parents, and you can reflect with your teachers and counselors of why they chose a school. What's the big, the reasoning behind it. And there are so many different reasons to choose a college. Reputation is first listed there because it's the worst one. Deciding on a school based on its reputation will never, bear fruit. But the other aspects of why students choose and how they connect to the school are all viable issues or reasons. It's a personal journey. Not one reason will fall for everybody. But as students look at considering that final choice and getting to that late time in April, some of these things will have impact. But as we move towards and work with students regularly, we find there's a top 5 reasons. One is going to be location. Again, I've worked at schools in Syracuse, New York, all the way to Honolulu, Hawaii. So have fun with location. Have fun with what you're going to learn outside of the classroom. It is a huge part of what you do. Try something different. Don't be afraid to try a small town. If you're from a big city, don't be afraid to try cold weather. If you're used to warm weather, have fun with that. It's not forever, and that learning that takes place outside the classroom will be critical. Learning about new culture, new food, new sports is always a fun part or fun backdrop to the education. The size of the school is going to be something that students really hone in on. I think a lot of students start their search looking for a medium-sized school near a big city, but really think about the size of a school and the interactions you're going to have with your teachers, the interactions you're going to have with your classmates, and what you have access to in ways of research, extracurricular activities, clubs, etc. The cost always comes up as a top deciding factor. Students will say, I got accepted. So many times it's great to acknowledge that students know that part of the process might result in denial letters, and that's okay. And it's fun to see students readjust that list after they've gone through the admissions process. But the number one reason is students will tell us, it just felt right. I went through this search, I went through this journey, and I have a gut feeling about the institution that I'm choosing. Parents, many times that decision will come late on the last day of April, and that's okay. But what I really want to talk about is how important it is to navigate or coach or consult with your son or daughter to get to that point, because they need to put their flag. They need to stake this as their school, and there'll be ups and downs. There'll be things that work out great, things that don't work out so great. But the journey and what they learn is important to get them to May 1, and then really to look at that as the starting line of a race. That's the time that they're really going to start to make the college experience what they wanted of it. We have seen students that show up passively to our campuses, not prepared to engage, but I think parents really have an opportunity after May 1 to really lean into helping your son or daughter to prepare for what's about to come. And this is just a quick slide. It's a little confusing now about the adjustment that your students will go through as they land on our college campuses. And I think thinking about this and what is going to take place in that first year can help to frame the search and the why. And it really helps to take reputation off the table. Who cares? Because we know you're going to go through these adjustment phases. And so after that May 1 timeframe, students are going to go through this anticipation phase. This is the summer before they come. A lot of our institutions do great summer events and welcome events and camps to get them ready. But that's the excitement. You can see this young lady here. She's crushed it at Bed Bath & Beyond. She's ready to decorate her dorm room. But that little puppy in the left-hand corner, that's an indication of what she's going to be leaving and perhaps the struggles and the challenges that she'll face. Students then go into the honeymoon phase, and I love talking about this phase. This is when you first land on campus. The pictures that we put on our website and into our brochures are all taken in the fall. Very few of them look like the next one. The honeymoon phase is that early entry. Everything looks great, everything's shiny, everything's new. But the adjustment phases will start to come in. The initial shock, a lot of times when I worked in the East Coast, the weather. was part of that initial shock. Times in Hawaii, it would be the food, that students would miss the home cooked food. We know they've got to push through to this first adjustment phase. We put so much into our first year experience. We have deans of first year experience. We have the clubs and the organizations. We really need students to get out of their resident halls and get engaged. And this is an important part of what you want to look for in colleges when you start that search. They will go back through an isolation period, parents. That usually will take place at midterms or near finals. That's when they start to think, I made the wrong decision. I should have gone someplace else. This has been exacerbated now because students watch their friends on Facebook, and they can see, you know, they're in Syracuse and watching their friend in Hawaii thinking, I knew I made the wrong decision. It's part of that natural process. They start to find adaptation. You see this group here of students that was on the campus I worked at, the California flag flying proudly. That's when they really start to build those friendships, and then they move towards that acceptance and integration. Parents, that's when they don't want to come home anymore. We get parents that call us in the first semester and say, we're not doing enough to help your son or daughter adjust. And then in the second semester, or that summer after the freshman year, parents are upset that your sons and daughters now decided to spend a summer on campus, or they tell you that they want to study abroad and that they're okay not coming home for that time period. So just as you start to look at schools, we know it's going to be tougher. Try to spend the time online, engaging with the colleges. There are opportunities to see most of us online through virtual tours. Again, some of our schools do track and look at your demonstrated interest, your connection to the school. As you sit in on those sessions, you're going to find material to build your why a particular school. You're going to be looking for the reasons that you want to be there. We do know that that's going to be tough, but try to engage with us through that process, through that visiting process. And we are understanding, again, of where you are. As we make our decisions, we're learning a lot right now from the colleges about how decisions look this year through early decision, and we'll learn more. But your counselors are going to stay up to date and appraised of what you're going to need to put into your applications and what stories you're going to need to tell us. But enjoy this journey. Again, think of May 1 as that starting line in a time when really your college takes off, that your college experience really starts at that point. The where you go won't be as big a deal as the what you do at that time, and really think about what you want to do in that 4 years, and it's going to turn out all right. Enjoy the journey. I'm going to turn it back over to Ross now, and I think we're going to move on to some information about testing, and glad to be able to spend some time with you tonight.
Ed, thank you so much. We really appreciate your expertise and your wisdom and your partnership. Go have a great aloha afternoon. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it over to Shelley Kierman, who's going to introduce our next guest.
Everyone, good evening. We now have the pleasure to hear from someone who's going to talk to us about standardized testing. This is a year where I think this is a really important conversation to be having. We've started having this conversation with your juniors in our class, in our one-on-one meetings with each of them. We've already talked about testing. We've sent an email home about it. Today we have John Lee, who's the Senior Director of Compass Education Group, with us. He also is going to be talking to the class, the juniors, on January 27th. So they will hear from him directly in a few weeks also. So we're really happy to introduce John Lee. Thanks so much for being here, John.
My pleasure. Here, let me share my screen. And I'm going to go into presentation mode. So what I really want to talk about, I want to be efficient with my time. I know that people have the Bachelor on later tonight, and you know, you got to have your priorities. Normally I do this presentation in about an hour. I want to get it done for you in like 15 minutes. I'm setting a timer right now, but I promise anyone who wants to go into painful detail about testing, you can give me a call or email me later this week or next week, and I'm happy to go through and answer every question that you have. For tonight, I'm going to try to hit some specific bullet points. And just for a little quick background on me, I did my undergrad and graduate degrees in music. So I've had a thriving career in test prep for going on 20 years now. But seriously, I'm always happy to come talk to Milken families. And I do appreciate so much of what Ed just presented. I'm going to try to build and reference some of that because I was taking copious notes here as he went. For tonight, I want to talk about a few key points in the time that we have One is how test scores are used in admissions, very brief. Next part, we're going to talk about test optional and test free and what that really means. I know that Ed touched on that a little bit a minute ago, but I'm going to try to elaborate on it. I'm also happy, by the way, to stick around and answer some questions at the end, as long as it doesn't cut into anybody's bachelor time later on. But the last thing we'll talk about is sort of the practicality of testing. What should my plan be? What should my timeline look like, especially, in light of COVID? So let's start with how test scores are used. So when I went to high school, I graduated class of 1991 from high school, and most students had a B average. That was actually me in high school. Solid B average, and that was the most common grade point average. Today, 20 years later, most students have A's. So this, for lack of a better term, grade inflation is bandied around a lot. The bottom line is there are more students getting A's now than ever before. So to stand out with just grades is a little more difficult. These standardized tests, as evil as they are, we like to think of them as necessary evils around even the test prep office that I work in. These tests consistently yield the same kind of results. That is, the majority of students score right in the middle, 50%, 50th percentiles, 18, 19, 20 on the ACT, high 900s, low thousands on the SAT. So even though they're getting all these A's in school, most students are still scoring in a much lower percentile on the standardized tests. Because this is one semi-objective measuring tool outside of a specific school's system of grading and teaching, it gives you a standalone, separate way to measure all students by one measuring stick. I'm not going to say that it's equitable and fair at all. That's a whole other thing we can get into. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump into sort of defining test optional. Test optional is a movement toward justice from a lot of us, from a lot of our points of view. The idea with test optional, even before I get into the data, test optional, let me just define it. Test optional just means, in plain terms, if you have a great score and it's going to buoy your chances of being admitted at a school, you should turn your score in. If you have a crummy score, if you're one of those students who has an awesome GPA, but your test scores never quite measure up, that's the perfect example of someone who needs to take advantage of the test optional landscape. Because when I say justice earlier, it's about, before test optional, tests always favored the students who were just naturally strong testers, or the students who paid for a ton of tutoring and raised their scores up into the clouds. So those kids who ended up with strong test scores were always favored in the previous system where everyone had the test. But there were always students, despite their best efforts, who would be left behind by that for a variety of reasons. So the test optional movement, again, is leveling the playing field by saying, hey, you saw all those data points that Ed showed us earlier, all of the factors that go into admissions decisions, not just GPA, not just testing, even though those might sit near the top in general priorities. If you just remove the testing piece, you still have all these other data points from which a school can make a holistic decision about who to admit at their school. So again, test optional is about leveling the playing field for students who aren't strong testers and not having them held back or limited. To give you a sense of the landscape, a year ago in 2019, actually a little more than a year ago now since we're in 2021, most colleges required tests. If you look at the landscape of about 400 schools that kind of fit into the moderately to highly selective categories Ed talked about, out of about 400 schools, about 65% of them pre-COVID required SAT and ACT. About a third of them were test optional already. So remember, before COVID, a third of moderately to highly selective schools were already test optional. And then a few were test flexible, which is a nuance I won't get into right now. After COVID hit by fall of 2020, look how these numbers have changed. About 95% of schools have gone away from requiring SAT, ACT. So the majority of schools right now for the class of 2021, and it kind of remains to be seen for the current juniors class of 2022, what their world will be like. But we expect a gradual return to some schools eventually requiring the tests, but no one knows for sure. And our expectation is schools will be very slow about getting back to this world where the majority are demanding SAT and ACT. we think the world moving forward is going to look much more like the post-COVID world we've seen for this last year. Although it just remains to be seen. There's a lot of factors well beyond the testing and admissions world that will help decide this stuff. But the bottom line with this graphic is to point out that the majority of schools are currently test optional. Now there are some nuances to this. That is, about 45% of the schools are trying this for 1 year. About 7% of the schools are doing multi-year. And then you've still got pretty much the same remaining third of schools that you had pre-COVID who are permanently test optional. What's new though, is we have a ton of schools, and there were always a couple before this, but now we have a whole big group of schools made up largely by the University of California schools that I'll touch on. About almost 8% of schools that are test free. Test free means don't bother sending us a score, we're going to throw it in the garbage. Or more accurately, if you send us a score, we won't be able to see it. It's not a part of our application. It won't be considered. So that's test free versus test optional. And I think at the beginning, when all this was announced in short headlines in USA Today, people were sort of conflating the idea of test optional being test free. I don't need a test anymore. Not true. Test optional has existed for years. If you have a good score, turn it in. Just to highlight again the test-free movement, here's a list of colleges that are test-free for varying periods of time. You have Caltech at the top of the list doing a 2-year trial. Cal State actually just announced today, I haven't updated the slide yet, that they're going to be, the whole Cal State system is also going to be test-free for next year. So this slide needs to be updated. Current juniors will not need any tests for Cal State. Cornell is test-free for specific options, and you can kind of go down the list here. As Ross said at the beginning, we'll supply you with everything in this presentation, including a recording of this, and I'll give the staff at Milken a slideshow, just a PDF of this slideshow as well, so you can go into detail. One thing I do want to highlight on this list, though, is the UC schools. So the UCs specifically have been moving in a test-free direction for years. They want to serve especially public school kids in California. Their mission is their mission is to serve all California high school kids as equitably and fairly as they can. And this testing piece has always been a barrier to a lot of students. So as a result, they have a very complex policy right now. What you'll see on here is that for the most part, for class of 2022 and beyond, the expectation is to be test-free. Again, a school that won't even look at test scores. But there are some exceptions. When you're looking at your colleges, as things progress with the University of California, we can go into detail, and I'm happy to talk with you about your test results and also how they relate to each school. And of course, the counseling staff at Milken can also kind of take you through this specifically. Let's talk a little bit, again, in the interest of time, I know I'm moving quickly, but I just want to hit the major points. The important thing to figure out is, which test should I take and when should I take it? This slide, for just a moment of levity, we were originally thinking SAT, but then NOAA's admissions advisor told us left-handed students born on Tuesdays do better on the ACT. Ross, did you say this? I'm sure it wasn't you, Ross. It better not have been. In reality, of course, that's a myth. There's no way to tell which test you favor until you just try practice tests. So really quickly, I'm just going to introduce the sections of each test for a quick comparison, and then we'll jump into timeline. We'll talk about timeline and when you should be taking the official tests. So this slide shows PSAT and SAT tests. The PSAT, think of it just as SAT Junior. It's not a very consequential test in terms of college admissions. So I'm going to focus on the SAT itself, which is the one that's going to get you into college, that or the ACT. Let's look at these two side by side. So PSAT and SAT both have a reading section. They start with a reading section. On the SAT, it's 65 minutes long of straight reading first thing in the morning on a Saturday, followed by a writing and language section. Then there's a math without calculator and a math with calculator. So it's still like the SAT we took as kids, half verbal, half math, but the actual content has been very much updated. Here's a sample reading passage. I won't take time to let you read it or anything, but it's basically you're presented a passage with a lot of detail. You're asked some questions about it. That's about obviously reading comprehension skills, analysis, that type of thing, deeper college level reading. In contrast, the writing and language section, I like to think of that as an editing test. They're giving you grammar questions, verb tense questions. They're asking you things about the way that a passage is structured and how all of the grammatical and punctuation is used. Now you can see a list here of common errors that they seek out just to get a sense. And again, you'll have this slideshow to pour over at your leisure later on, but punctuation, pronouns, comma splices, they're really trying to nitpick the specific areas that students struggle with in terms of their kind of editing skills with writing. Now on the math section, both SAT and ACT focus on math all the way through Algebra 2. So this is a good reason why a current junior who's basically in the equivalent level of Algebra 2 should wait until toward the end of junior year to take the test. And I will talk about timeline in a moment, but I just wanted you to see how these two tests compare, SAT and ACT, specifically that the ACT puts a little more focus on geometry, where SAT really minimizes that. And in general, they're both moving through, as I said before, Algebra 2. So we're talking about pre-algebra, geometry, algebra, and Algebra 2, a little bit of trigonometry. Sometimes that's a factor in deciding which test to take. If I just hold up the ACT and SAT side by side, the big section that really stands out as different is the science section. I'll give you an example of the science in 1 second, but I just want to point out the similarities first. SAT has reading, ACT has reading. SAT has writing and language, ACT has English, just another name for the similar content as I mentioned earlier. It's grammar, punctuation, all of that. Then there's a math section on the ACT, similar to the way that there's math on the SAT. One nice thing about the ACT math is you can use a calculator the whole time. And for many students, this is a good thing. Because the ACT has 4 sections, English, math, a reading section, not unlike the SATs, and then a science section, because there are 4 sections and math is only one of those 4, the ACT tends to minimize the impact of a low math score compared to the SAT, which is 50% math. So sometimes this is something else to consider. But again, you want to take both practice tests and really see how your scores come out before you make that decision. So we mentioned English, math, reading, all the same type of content, although presented a little differently from the SAT. And then there's this science section. The science section is what makes the ACT unique. Here's what a science question looks at. It's not specifically testing your existing knowledge of biology, chemistry, or physics. What it is it's presenting you dense reading passages and charts and graphs on science topics. So most of what you need to know is actually within the passage. So a strong reader who's not intimidated by odd-looking graphs and charts like the one that you see here can do very well in this section. A lot of times strong readers do very well in the science, even if they're not enthusiastic about science as a topic in school. For 2 seconds, I want to touch on this optional essay that you see here at the end. At the end of each test, there's the option of taking an essay. Prior to COVID, essays were a much more important part of college admissions. Today, there are 3 colleges at the moment that strictly require the essays. So unless you're applying to West Point, Montana Western, or Martin Luther College, you don't need to take the essay on your SAT or ACT test officially. That's all I'm going to say about essay. Okay, so once you've taken both a practice SAT and a practice ACT, the way to figure out which one to pursue for the official test is to compare them. And this is a concordance put together by the College Board and the ACT. Let's take the student, let's call him John. He takes the ACT, gets a 22. On the SAT gets a 1200. And if we follow the lines of this concordance, it shows that this student favors SAT. That 1200 is a little more competitive than the 22 on the ACT. So this concordance is a way, and there's many tools like this online. Again, we didn't create these. These are figured out by the College Board and the ACT. You take both tests, you compare them. Another student takes a test, gets a 31 on the ACT. Really strong score. 1400 on the SAT. When you compare the two, percentile-wise, they fall into the same zone. So in this case, you just pick the test you hate the least. Never take both SAT and ACT officially or prep for them officially. I'm the tutoring guy, I'm the test prep guy. I don't want to sell you an SAT program and an ACT program. I want you to pick the one test that fits you, not like the colleges. You want to choose the best fit for you and then pursue that test until you max out your potential with your scores. Compass always offers practice tests to Milken students. You can give us a call, you can look us up. and we'll give you in-depth analysis and feedback about your test scores. Again, happy to set those up if you haven't already taken them. I know Milken's really good about exposing students to practice test opportunities. So my watch is buzzing now that I'm down to the 14-minute mark, and I want to respect your time. Let me just give you the timeline piece, and then I will stop and field questions or whatever you guys would like to do next. So here's the timeline. Fall of 11th grade or beginning of spring, take a practice SAT or a PSAT test. In the non-COVID times, you would have a PSAT test in October, but a practice SAT or PSAT in the fall of 11th grade. That is followed typically by a spring SAT or a spring ACT. There are test dates in March and May for SAT. There's also a June test date. ACT, you've got February and April. February, probably not going to happen at this stage with the way COVID's going. A tiny handful of students might take subject tests if their colleges require it. I'm not going to even go into subject tests because it's such a tiny number of students that need to even deal with them. So that leaves a June test date then for another SAT, or again, you can take the ACT in June. Summer after 11th grade, you're going to refine your college list. You're going to work with your counselors. You're going to narrow it down further. And then you have the opportunity to take an SAT again in August and ACT in July. And senior year, and this is not unique to COVID, by the way, every year students usually hit their highest score in the summer or fall going into 12th grade. So even though you might do the heavy lifting for prep in junior year because you want to raise that base score up as high as you can before you get to 12th grade, the summer before 12th grade is usually very light review, a few practice tests, whereas the months of prep during 11th grade are often more intense. This year, because of COVID, we're steering students toward April, May, and June test dates simply because we don't know where LA will be and we don't want students risking their health to go take tests. There are always kids who choose to go out of state. We don't push students to do that. We don't encourage that at all. I don't think risking your health when most schools are test optional is necessarily a wise decision. But again, you know, you work with students at all levels. So I think at that point, I'll stop my share and I'll field questions or turn it back to the counseling staff to steer us toward the next phase of our night.
Thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. Thanks for keeping the timer. You just can get lost in talking about standardized testing for hours, all of us, I'm sure. I think we're going to continue with, if people have questions, they can chat them into Ms. Schreiber, and that way we can let John go. At the end of the evening, Ms. Schreiber will pose any necessary questions that we can tackle. And if for some reason we couldn't, we will, of course, direct them towards you. But thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully we can do this in person again next year. Be safe.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. All right, and Mr. Mancuda, are you sharing some slides too? Okay, lovely. I'm just adjusting my screen as well. Okay, so kind of thinking about where we are. Welcome everyone, by the way, I'm Ms. Jackson. And we have been meeting with your students every week since the very first week of their junior year in our weekly college counseling classes, and thinking what's to come ahead in the rest of their junior year. We will of course continue with the weekly college counseling classes. We have some really exciting classes coming up where we have John from Compass will chat with your students. We have Gary Clark, Director of Admission at UCLA, coming to chat with our students. We will be introducing students to College Kickstart, an online platform where they will be using it as a tool to organize and create their college list, which is really exciting that that's coming up so soon. Even in a few months, the students will also start creating their own common application so that they can be more than ready to tackle that application and be ready to submit it in the fall. So we will continue with our weekly college counseling classes, and that is just a great way for us to get to know the students in the classroom setting, which we've been doing. And then we've also started our first individual meetings with students. So I know for all of us, we began those last month in December, and that was really exciting for me to have a student one-on-one in a meeting beyond just their like little quiet Zoom boxes in the classroom. To actually get to know them on an individual basis has been great to start those relationships. we sent home emails following those meetings in December, and in those emails, we covered a lot of information around standardized testing in this unpredictable time. A lot of it is what John was just chatting about in his presentation regarding our general message that this is an unpredictable time in terms of how the pandemic is affecting standardized testing, yet we want students to feel prepared with having a plan in terms of how they're going to tackle this, and recognizing that when they might implement that plan for standardized testing prep, that will differ from student to student. So as John mentioned, the very first step that students should do in thinking about standardized testing is take a mock exam in both the ACT and the SAT. Many of our students did this. If for some reason your student did not, definitely we can point them in the direction of Compass or other testing agencies where they can do those mock exams for free to determine which one's going to be the better fit. As John said, there should be no situation in which a student would prepare for both. And so once a student knows which one they're going to prepare for, it's really a matter of having some flexibility right now in terms of navigating the unpredictable nature of not being sure exactly when these tests will be offered on a consistent basis in LA County. So just to give some frame of reference, standardized tests have not occurred in LA County on a consistent basis since March 2020. And we're really not sure exactly when they will be offered on a consistent basis in the future. But it is important to note that standardized tests will likely be a part of most students' college search process and college application process. So that's where we're saying that it is important to have a plan in place of how one might prepare, but in terms of the timing of when someone might implement that will depend from student to student. So of course, we never encourage students to travel out of the area to go take these tests. Please don't do that. You're putting your health at risk and the safety of yourself, your family, and others. So we definitely would not recommend that. And in thinking about what the standardized testing plan will look like, that can really depend. Some students have started test prep and they are eager and chomping at the bit to take a test whenever they hear that they are available in the area, and that's great. Other students might be starting test prep in a less official capacity where they are doing free or more affordable test prep with Khan Academy or buying a test prep book. That is a really phenomenal way to prepare for these tests. And for some students, that might be what they do as their whole test prep plan. There's definitely students every year who don't pay lots of money for classes and tutors, and that's totally fine. The affordability is a really big piece of this as well. And then there's also some students who are waiting to hear when when tests are actually taking place on a consistent basis. That will be when they know, okay, now's the time to start implementing my plan. I think in general, as much as it is unpredictable, I feel fairly confident that hopefully students will be able to take tests in a safe way come summer or fall if that's going to be part of their process. So it really is just about having some flexibility right now and pumping the brakes a little bit, and also having a plan in place so that students can implement it at the time that's going to be best for them. So as we've mentioned, the communication channels are open. I hope that students will keep us in the loop in terms of choices that they're making around this, and that's really the only way that we can help and give guidance, as much as they are including us in that conversation. So thinking about the next upcoming meeting, we start the next meeting this week, actually, one-on-one with our students. And it's a full 60-minute meeting where we really get to know them, what makes them tick, what lights them up, what keeps them up at night, a little bit about their family, what they're looking for in a college experience. These meetings, to me, are some of my favorites because I really start to get to know the students on an individual basis. In these meetings, one of the biggest tools that we use to create a great conversation in the meetings is the second junior questionnaire. This assignment was due this past Friday, and it is by far the most important assignment of college counseling that students will have. It is very, very critical to our work. We use this all the time in writing our recommendation letters for your students in the summer, in really just being able to prepare questions and be ready for an impactful and expansive conversation in these meetings. And unfortunately, we have had a record number of students not complete this assignment yet. I am sure that they are just like putting on the finishing details and that it's going to be in my inbox by tomorrow morning at the latest. all to say, I hope that they're coming soon, because there have been far too many students who have not submitted this assignment, and by not submitting it, it could potentially delay when their meeting will happen, and therefore their process. But all to say, these meetings are a lot of fun where we're getting to know the student. We're also thinking about their course requests for their senior year classes, which is kind of crazy to think about, but that's coming up. Faculty have added those course recommendations to My Milken, and we chat with students about what challenges they're hoping to take on and feel confident to take on for senior year, while also thinking about how they can not only push themselves and maximize their potential, but have balance, thinking about how applying to college and writing many essays for college applications can be a big chunk of their time, and what any other commitments that they might have in their senior year as well. So we will have a great, robust conversation with students around what they're hoping to take on for senior year. We also, in these meetings, will chat with students about how their relationships have been going with faculty and building those relationships, knowing that in a few months, not right away, but in a few months, they will start having conversations with faculty, requesting faculty to write recommendation letters on their behalf. So hopefully students are creating relationships with faculty so that they can feel comfortable to ask those requests and feel like that could be a really positive recommendation letter from the faculty. And a huge part of the conversation as well is really getting to know the student and what they're looking for in a college experience. Last week in class, we did the college wish list activity, where we basically, it's kind of like a dating app, but for colleges, where, they're filling out this wish list to kind of check off all the filters of the things that they're looking for in a match. So I guess I could go work for a dating app after this. It's basically the same thing. And all to say, we're asking students if they're looking, what type of classroom environment they're looking for. How important is it to them to have a really big Jewish community on campus? Do they envision themselves at a football game every weekend? Are they hoping to be far away from home? Do they need certain types of weather that they're looking for? It really can depend. So students filled out this wish list activity last week in class, and in these meetings, we will discuss what they're looking for in a college environment. And from there, we will research and curate a list of colleges that we suggest that the student looks into based on what they're saying they're looking for. And the next slide will kind of show a bit of an example of what this could look like. Of course, the font is way too small for a slide, but you will see your own students' personalized suggested list of colleges soon enough post their meeting with us one-on-one. And please be thoughtful when you see this list and be mindful of how you speak about certain colleges, especially if it's a college that you're not super familiar with. That's okay. I mean, we wouldn't be doing our job if we were only suggesting colleges that the student or your family is already familiar with. As Ed has spoken about, there are thousands of colleges in the country and the world. And so we are really taking to heart what the student is saying that they're looking for, how we've gotten to know the student in terms of getting to know what might be a good match for them, and curating a list that's going to be really specific to them and hopefully open their mind beyond options that they already have on their radar. It is up to the student at that point, after receiving this list, to research every single school on the list. And if they like certain colleges about it, amazing, keep it on their initial college list. If they realize that this school is not the right fit for them, that's fine, they can take it off. So we're definitely encouraging students to use SCORE, to use college websites. There's guidebooks of different colleges. We've given them the tools and resources to know how to research colleges at this point. And it is our expectation that they'll research every school on the list, have an open mind, chat with you and your family around any limitations or expectations as well, and really start to think about what that initial college list will look like. And we also really chat a lot about giving students a range of viability in terms of them later on creating a balanced college list. And that's definitely something that you will be hearing a little bit more about tonight. But all to say, that's kind of where we've been so far, and what is literally coming up this week are these next one-on-one meetings. And from there, I'm going to pass it over to, I believe, Mr. Mancuda to chat about the spring family meetings.
Thank you, Jess. I guess if anybody in the room works for Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, Jess has officially applied. It's going to suck to lose her as a college counselor, but clearly her heart is elsewhere. That's good to know. But she would be a fantastic dating app person. So I think it is my turn to talk a little bit about spring family meetings, the next bullet point you see here. Spring family meetings are going to happen really soon. They're going to happen in March or April. They could also be delayed and happen at any point before the junior year is over. I'll speak personally. I think it's awesome to get to know your kids and to get to know what their passions are and what they might want to do with their college careers. Nothing really seems full circle and complete until we get parents in the conversation as well to really talk about your aspirations and your goals for your kids, and to really sit down and have an honest conversation with you about the process. So this week, we're going to send a lot of stuff home this week. That's really important to note. We're going to send home PDFs of our presentation. We're going to send home the recording. Shelley Kierman will talk a little bit later about another really big piece of the email we sent home this week. But another part of the email home will be links to our individual Calendly pages. So myself and Jessica, Shelley, and Sam will send out these links for families to schedule family meetings. Really important to note that these family meetings must occur when your students have free periods. They absolutely cannot miss class for these meetings. So we're going to make sure that you consult with them about when their free periods might be. They can also happen during Lishma after school at 2:30. And again, they could happen ideally in March or April, but if they have to happen after spring break in April or May, that is totally fine. Our goal is to meet with every family before the end of the junior year. The main components of this meeting are going to be doing a deep dive into the college application process, namely the timeline and the types of applications that are available to your students, and then the components of an application. So Ed talked a little bit about that, but when a student applies to college, what is an institution evaluating to determine whether or not that student gets in? We're also going to spend a lot of time during these meetings talking about your sons and daughters' actual lists. At that point, they will have created lists. We will go through them with you and talk about the reality of admission to those schools based on their GPA and their possible test scores and the other qualitative elements of their application. So we're going to move things around. We're going to let you know if the list is realistic. We're going to let you know if it needs to be grown, truncated, so on and so forth. And then we're going to talk about the next steps in the process so that going into summer, your son and daughter and you as a family know what our expectations are next. The other major element of these parent meetings are the parent narrative. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Shelley Kierman, to walk you through our expectations for that document.
Hi, good evening. So as Ross mentioned, the parent narrative is a document that we're going to be emailing home this week. This is your homework assignment. So just like we give the juniors lots of assignments, and their junior questionnaire that we just did was their most important assignment, this is your most important assignment. So don't get on your kids if you're not going to do your own work too. We really value what you can tell us about your kid. You know them best, and we rely on what you have to say. So there are a number of questions that let you talk about your kid from various perspectives. We added a couple questions this year in regards to the impact of COVID on your family, anything that we need to know about what your child has experienced during this time or how it's impacted your family that might be important for us. The purpose of the narrative is to give us some insight into who they are, things they might not share about themselves, context about them or your family that would just be helpful for us to know so that we can best guide them, so we can best support them, so that we can best, guide them towards colleges that would be appropriate, including whether or not you're applying for financial aid, because if that has a big weight in their process, that will be an important thing for us to know about. When it comes to the narrative, we want your honesty. We want you to be candid. We appreciate, you to tell us, don't sugarcoat everything. Like everything that we're learning about your son or daughter is just really good for us to just better know who they are. Some of it we are going to potentially even use in our letters of recommendation. I know when I go to write my letters of recommendation, one of the first documents I open when I pull out a kid's file is the parent narrative. For me, it sets the tone for the kid. And when I go to open a file and there's a parent narrative missing and I don't have it, it's really disappointing, to be honest with you. It's a huge missed opportunity for parents who don't do this. So we really expect and hope and anticipate that you will all take it seriously. You know, if there are two parents in the home, you're both welcome to write one separately. You're welcome to have just one parent do it. Whatever is better for you is fine for us. They are due to us to be emailed to us by your family meeting. So if your family meeting is on March 23rd, make sure we get it before that meeting. That is just that's going to be your due date for when we turn this in. But we really do rely on this when we're writing the letter of recommendation. The counselor writes a letter of recommendation for every student. Every college, most colleges require letters from counselors. And so this is a really, really helpful piece for us. So we really thank you in advance for spending time on this. The next thing I want to talk about is the importance of a balanced list. So Ed mentioned some of the things that are on this list. I'm going to just give a little context to what this is about. A college list needs to have balance. You know, we have kids on average, as the slide says, apply to 8 to 12 schools. Some kids apply to 4 schools, but even within their 4 schools, they still have enough balance and enough options. Honestly, like the most important thing for us is that your kids are working towards their potential and giving themselves options that they're really happy with. We want to support both ends of the spectrum. But as you know, as competitive as this process is, the balance is really critical. So for example, a school that we would call a viable or a likely is a college where the academic record of the student, the GPA and or test scores are above the school's admitted profile. So that means that if a student's GPA is a 3.8 and the average admitted to that school is a 3.5, the student is, you know, probably in pretty good shape academically to be competitive at that school. A couple things you need to know about viables. It does not mean guarantee. It does not mean it's a shoo-in. It does not mean it's a backup. It does not mean it's a safety. We don't use the terms backup or safety in our office ever because they literally imply it's like a last resort. And we never want kids to feel like they're not good enough. We never want kids to think that they have some way disappointed their family or themselves. We want them to feel like every option is viable. To us, a viable choice is a great choice. It's a place where they're going to be happy, successful, find themselves over 4 years, you know, have an excellent education and social life and enjoy living wherever they're going to be. So it is important, as you can see on the slide, for us to approve of a final list come October of senior year when they do their final list for us, that they have a minimum of 3 viables. So 3 schools that are going to be likely for them to get into is what we feel comfortable with. Because like I said, they're not all going to get into all of their viables. They might get into 2, but that means they still have the choice. And at the end of the day, we really want kids to have choices that they feel good about, of where they can be happy anywhere. The last thing we want kids to do is to apply to a school that they would never go to. We do not want them to waste an admit from a college, because if they're admitting your kid, but your kid's never going to go there, that means they're not giving another kid a shot. And so we want our kids to be really thoughtful about their list and to make sure they are only applying to colleges where they really could see themselves and really be happy. And really consider going if they're admitted. And like Ed said, viables are the schools where they could get merit scholarship. They're not getting any merit money from their reaches. They would only get merit money, which is scholarship money awarded to them for their academic performance. They could be offered $10,000 a year or $20,000 a year or whatever it could be, depending on the school. Those are likely to come from more viable schools. So if finances are an issue and if you want your kid to have some merit scholarship money, then they need to have a viable heavy list that will help them and you. A 50-50 or a target is one where the kid's academic profile evenly matches the school. And unfortunately, the college admissions world is unpredictable year to year. A 3.8 at, one school in 2019 might have gotten a kid in, but in 2020, it's not going to get a kid in anymore. And there could be a million factors behind that. And kids are not admitted or denied ever based on one data point. It's a multitude of factors for sure. But a 50-50 is basically like, they could get in, they might not get in, depending on other things in the application, depending on their essays, depending on their demonstrated interest, their supplemental writing. Their supplemental writing is very, very important. And so we really focus on that in the senior year. It could be, between their letters of recommendation and their test scores and their interview, if they do that, but also the institutional need of the school, like Ed also talked about. Every college has a priority list and it's not public. So it's not like we can all work towards that priority. You can only be authentic in your applications and the chips are going to fall. But a school can always determine well, we need more of this and we need more of this. And this is what we're looking for this year. And so that applicant pool and what they're looking for can change year to year. And so somebody who got in with certain scores one year might not get in the next year. And that is the reality. And then the reach or the unlikely schools are schools that are inherently competitive, where they have admission rates under 25%. So if a school's admit rate is under 25%, and or if the student's academic record falls below the average admitted to that college, it is a reach. So if the student has a 3.8 and the average admitted to that school is a 4.2, they're well below the profile of the college. It's a reach for them. But if a student has a 4.3 and they're applying to a school that has an average of a 4.3 or 4.2, it is still a reach for that student, likely because most of the applicants applying to that college are also 4.2s and 4.3s. And they're not admitting everybody. They're turning down kids all the time who could go there, who could do the work, who could be successful, who could easily belong there and deserve to go there and have worked really hard. At the end of the day, it comes down to the number of seats they have in their classrooms, how many beds they have in their dorms, how many kids they want in their class. And colleges are kind of work as an art and a science. They have a specific number of kids they want to enroll. They could have a list of 1,650 kids that they want to enroll in their freshman class, and they are going to admit a number of kids that will, scientifically get them down to 1,650, and that is the goal of the school, and they can't go more than that. And so competitive colleges are competitive for the highest kids because they can't admit every high kid, and that is the reality, and that is why we want them to be reaching for their potential, but we also want them to be having options in schools where they are going to have really good choices that you feel good about, that they feel good about. And most importantly, we really want you to support the concept of a balanced list. And we want you to support the schools that they're likely to get into. A school that they're likely to get into means that that college wants them. And let me tell you, getting into college feels really good and getting denied really stings. And so we really want them to have a successful process, and it's going to have bumps, but we want them to overall feel really successful about what they're accomplishing. If we go to the next slide, colleges to consider. So we want to sort of put this together in a way to help you think about, rather than thinking about the typical Milken college list, for example, if every single senior applied to the exact same list of colleges, we would have some trouble because they can't all get into the same schools. And every school is, you can't get into every school, and we need to have balance, and we need to look at the qualities and the characteristics that they think they want and find schools similar to it that also have those qualities and the characteristics. So what we want you to start thinking about is, for example, if you think your kid would want a large public D1 spirited school with Jewish life, very common at Milken. I know it's shocking. Like Michigan, Wisconsin, UCLA, Berkeley, Santa Barbara, Colorado, Indiana, Arizona, Oregon. We send tons of apps to those colleges every year. We send a lot of applications to all of those colleges. But the schools on this list have all of those qualities also. Arizona State, Delaware, Maryland, Michigan State, Purdue, Rutgers, Penn State, Syracuse. These are all large schools. mostly public. There's a couple privates in here. Very spirited, very, very rich Jewish life. So it's possible to find colleges that are maybe off the beaten path according to the Milken list, but are also super popular and super common in other parts of the country. And we really want our kids to open their minds, and for you to open your minds to other options and to have some other ideas of schools that maybe could be good fits for them. So as we have been doing college research in our classes, we assigned them a college research assignment in the fall where they had to research a college they probably never heard of before, because we want them to learn about new schools. They don't know everything, and neither, you know, we're all kind of learning through this as we go, and we want you to also be really informed and to have an open opinion about all of the different schools that are out there. Here's another slide to show you if you think that they might want an urban campus like BU, GW, NYU, Penn. These are some other schools to consider. So again, we are going to put some of these maybe alternate colleges on their college list that we send home to them to just consider. And we really like your support. We'd really like you to support our suggestions so that they can look at them and consider them, because the language and the perspective that you share is going to really impact if they're going to be open to it. So if you could be open to some of the names that we're going to give, even if you're not familiar with it, you can learn along with them and decide if these feel like they could be good fits or not.
I'm going to take over from Shelley for a couple slides. I couldn't agree with her more about us really trying to open up their minds and needing your support in helping them see what their options might be. So I'm going to take you through 3 or 4 other kind of examples of other options. You know, a lot of our students at the top of the class are going to be applying to really, really selective schools, like the ones that you see at the top of the page. Well, here's a list of 12 to 15 other schools that are extremely elite and have extremely low admit rates, that are extremely hard to get into, but they are schools that far, far fewer Milken students apply to for various reasons, maybe location, maybe size, maybe weather, but we're gonna, again, ask them to expand their minds. If we see a student with a Duke or a Northwestern or an Emory on their list, we're gonna likely push them to think about Hopkins and Tufts and Rice and Rochester if those schools are appropriate for them. So again, pushing them to think a little bit outside the box. And when you think about really, really selective schools, the amount of students from Milken who are applying in direct competition with one another does play a major, major role. A school like Emory or Penn or Wash U, even if all the applicants are really strong and admissible, they're all not getting in. A school like Wash U cannot take all of the applicants from Milken in a given year. So if we can help students see the wider variety of options, that would be really beneficial. The next slide talks about engineering and architecture and computer science. We have a lot of students who have done incredible things in our architecture and computer science programs. They're looking to continue on those paths. And these are some engineering and computer science and architecture schools that are applied to, again, in a little less numbers. I think it was last school year, we sent 2 or 3 kids to Santa Clara. Santa Clara was for a long, long time an unknown school to our community. I could think of at least 2. There might have been a 3rd student from the class of 2020 who went to Santa Clara. We have had a lot of students over the last couple of years go to Drexel to study engineering. So again, really trying to open up our students' minds to the types of schools that might be out there. The next list is going to focus on California schools. We are very, very aware that a lot of our students and a lot of our families want their kids to stay local, whether that's California or Los Angeles. And the common names are USC and UCLA and Berkeley and Santa Barbara. And we get that. And we're going to support our students who want to apply to those schools. But here are other schools, many of which are an hour from LA, maybe 90 minutes in some cases, that are phenomenal institutions. My colleagues and I have been to almost every one of these schools. My colleagues and I have been to many of these schools. We've taken Milken students on some rare occasions to these schools. These are great local and California options that we want our kids to know about. One thing I'll quickly mention that is also really important for us to know about, and we're going to get this from you all in the parent meetings, in the parent narratives. If it is a requisite that your students stay close to home, or stay in California. We need to know that as their counselors. But more importantly, we absolutely need you to dictate that to your children and to have a conversation with your kids about those expectations. If you have expectations that they're staying close to home for financial reasons or for any reasons whatsoever, we need abundant transparency on your part so that we are on the same page. We will absolutely work within the parameters you set, but we need to know what those expectations are. The last slide I'll show is about small liberal arts colleges. There's connotations with small liberal arts colleges all the time, one being that they're small, and that's a fairly appropriate assumption. But the other one is that they're art schools. It's really important to know these are small liberal arts and science colleges. At all of these colleges, science is a major. Bio, chemistry, physics, and I would actually contend that the biggest majors on these campuses are probably bio and chemistry, along with maybe psychology. Business is a major at many of these schools. Many of your schools in the question, or many of your students rather, in the questionnaires they're filling out for my colleagues and I, are talking about how much they value and love Milken and the Milken environment, small classes, intimate relationships with teachers and faculty, the ability to talk to people like Mr. Lindsay and Mr. Greenberg and Ms. Farkas at a moment's notice. That's the experience they're going to get at schools like this. Now, we would be the first to admit that other qualities might not exist at these schools. Jewish life might not always be uber prevalent, and there's not going to be a football tailgate necessarily every weekend. But these schools will provide a lot of what Milken provides, and we want to make sure that your students are also aware of these opportunities at some of these amazing small liberal arts and science university. These schools get less Milken applicants. They are really attracted by kids from Milken because our kids share the values that kids going to these types of schools also have. So I feel awful. We have a fourth member of our team, and I realize it is 7:54, and you have yet to hear from Sam Schreiber. So Sam Schreiber is going to take it away from here and bring us home.
Okay, thank you guys all for the questions in the chat. I'm going to take a break from answering those. In talking about your students getting to know about schools, virtual college visits, normally this is when I talk about getting on campus, but obviously that's not happening right now. And so virtual college visits are something that colleges have invested thousands and thousands of dollars into the technology and the time to allow you and your students to quote unquote visit a campus. All colleges are doing virtual tours and information sessions. Some of them are doing panels with students. Some of them are doing doing meetings with our local representatives so that your students can actually chat with the person who might visit Milken in the fall, who might read their application. The benefits of getting to know a campus are really allowing your student to see, does this place feel like somewhere I could be happy? And I always say to students, now is not the time to pick your favorite college. Now is the time to research all of the schools that we present to you to figure out places that you're excited to learn more about, that you want to talk to us more about, that you hope to really zero in on over the summer, in the fall, when reps come to campus or come virtually. Getting to know colleges now is one of the best ways to set themselves up for an easier fall. It's always so difficult for us when seniors come to their meeting in the fall and they still know nothing about the schools on their list. And it's clear they've really taken a break from thinking about places where they would be happy. These visits, some of them might be pre-recorded, they might not be live, and so you can do those at your leisure. But as your student starts to get on the email list for these colleges, they may find out about live events that would allow them to ask a current student a question, to ask the admissions person a question, whether that's, what's it like being in a big city, or what's it like taking 2 flights to get there, or about specific programs that they're really interested in. Some colleges are going to track your students' interactions with their school. And that might be a part of the admissions decision. That's what we call demonstrated interest. We've talked to your students about it. So starting to do these virtual visits is starting their digital footprint with that school and signals to the school, this student knows enough about us that we think their application is in earnest. We're not a backup. We're not a school that they just think they're going to get into. They've actually taken the time to get to know our school and have decided that they think it's a good fit. And that goes a long way, especially in a virtual learning environment. There's no excuse to not open the email, to not attend the virtual session, because you don't have to get on a plane to do it. So that even is opening emails, clicking links, things like that. Not every school is going to have that weigh in on the admissions decision, but every school has access to this data. We know how the internet works. But the bottom line is, does the school feel and look right to you? What is the messaging of the school? What are the things they choose to highlight on their website? When you look at the clubs and organizations, are there things where you're like, yeah, I certainly would think I would find my people there. And, you know, we talk to your students about how to do this research. We hope that they are starting to do that as soon as they get that list from us. And it's something that we are checking in with them about consistently through class, through family meetings, and in the fall. Next is going to be events, premier events from our office. The first one's a virtual financial aid workshop, part 1. Part 2 is in the fall, next fall. I would recommend every single one of you go to this part 1, even if you think you're not going to be applying for financial aid, because February 16th is going to be a great overview of what is financial aid. What does that even mean? What is the difference between merit aid? What's the difference between need-based aid, grants, loans, and what is the process to apply? So I would think of February 16th as the information gathering before you decide if you're going to go through with the actual financial aid application process. They'll also show you the reality of what cost of attendance can be, which might be what triggers you to say, oh, we're applying for financial aid. We'll be hosting a virtual parent case studies event on May 6th at 6:30. Please put that on your calendar now. We will follow up with more information, obviously, as the date approaches, but it's very important that you have that on your calendar. That is an opportunity for you as a cohort. So all of my students' parents will be together, all of Ms. Kierman's students' parents will be together to basically have a mock admissions committee. We'll bring in admissions officers from schools to help run it, and you'll be reviewing fake applications to a made-up institution, but you'll be having real conversation, real debate, and real, dare I say, controversy over who you want to admit, waitlist, or deny. And it's great insight into how the things that your students put into an application are actually used and reviewed. So critical for you guys to attend that to help give you insight into the process. We're going to be doing the same program with your students earlier in the year. I believe it's earlier. And then summer college writing workshop. This is something that came up in the chat box, and I love the foresight into it. So we offer a June and an August writing workshop. They're exactly the same. The only difference is the timing. So you should pick the one that works the best for your student's schedule. In this workshop, they will hear from college admissions officers, and they'll be paired with a faculty member. And this is when they'll draft and ideally almost finish their personal statement. This is what's called, you know, their college essay. It used to be 500 words or less. Now it's 650 words or less. They have 650 words to really get across who they are in a way that you know, is going to go to the majority of schools that they apply to. So I'm not going to say it's mandatory. There's no reason not to attend. It's going to be virtual. You see the dates, June 14th to 17th. We're waiting on August dates. You should also put that on your calendar now. You do have to register for that, and the registration is not live quite yet, but we will also talk about it in the family meetings. The registration form will be available on my Milken, and we will also send it home in an email once we have it live. So please, please know that we hope every one of your students will take advantage of it. Having that personal statement done before school even starts motivates students. It can allow them to use their summer very wisely and feel confident starting to write their essays over the summer. And it also just checks what can be one of the most stressful parts of the process off the list. So these are the main events that are to come the rest of this year. Hopefully you all had your phones out and put them on your calendar. I am gonna turn it over to Mr. Ankuta as I answer this one last question.
Thanks, Sam. A couple quick housekeeping items about Sam's list. She mentioned the student case study program. We'll be talking with your kids at length about that program in our weekly class, but that program will be on April 23rd. So they will have that event about 2 weeks before you all do. And it, you know, we've adapted to doing this online. That is probably our favorite live event every year. We did it for the current seniors last spring, and it really transitioned quite well to an online forum. So we're excited to bring that to you also. Just so you have a general sense, the August writing workshop should begin on August 16th. I believe that's the Monday that week. So the 16th through the 19th, if you want to have both those dates on your calendar. Ms. Schreiber mentioned it's one or the other. Students do not do both. There is no advantage to doing one versus the other than potentially getting a head start if you do it in June. This is a smaller grade, so we will probably not limit how many students can do it in each setting. Generally, we get a pretty good balance between the two. And like Ms. Schreiber said, we are going to get a lot more information out to you in the coming months about those events. In texting with Mr. Lindsay before the event started, I promised him we were going to be done at 8, so I have lied to a dear colleague and I'm feeling terrible about it. So what I'm going to say is, I think I have a slide here for general questions. I'm going to thank Sam Schreiber for answering questions that came in throughout the course of the evening. And I'm going to encourage everybody who has questions left over or questions that you want to direct directly to one of us to please, please, please email your college counselor directly. We will get back to you as soon as humanly possible on answers. Know that a lot of the questions you might have are questions we're going to tackle extensively during those family meetings. Also know I'm probably going to log out of this event and start writing the email that's going to go home to you all this week. A lot is coming home in the email, so I might also encourage you to wait to get that email probably on Wednesday, which will have the Calendly links to our calendars. It will have the parent narrative. It will have the PDFs. It will have the recording of our event, all that stuff for you to look over. And it also have the dates for you to add to your calendar. So with that, I'm going to thank you all very, very much for your attention and reiterate a happy new year, wishing you all a very, very safe and healthy start to the new year. And we look forward to working with you all over the course of the next several months. Thanks so much.
Thank you, awesome college counselors. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.